Hello, my name is Dr. Harvey Kaltsas. I'm an acupuncture physician, and I've been studying and practicing traditional Chinese medicine for 50 years. Today, we're going to talk about being in the flow and how that can help you be healthy. When we talk about being in the flow, the question to ask is being in the flow of what? And where and how is that flowing? Before we get into that, I'd like to share a bit of my personal history. In 1970, I had several friends come back from Vietnam, pretty traumatized by their experience. I was very much against the war and seeking ways to find peace for myself and for the country. I got into the practice of yoga daily and meditated on passages from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I was seeking to find a deeper understanding of a relationship with God. One passage describes the swoon-like state the soul experiences in the first 3.5 days after dying, at which time one awakens and is struck by the thought, "What happened?" Then, and this is a quote from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, "Then the wisdom of the Buddha body, blue in color, shining, transparent, glorious, dazzling, will shoot forth and strike against thee with a light so radiant that though you will be scarcely able to look at it. That which is the clear light the Tibetans call the Buddha Amitabha. Knowing this is sufficient. Knowing this is sufficient." This reminded me of the closing couplet of John Keats's Ode to a Grecian Urn. "Beauty is truth, truth beauty, knowing this is all you need to know." Armed with these insights, I set off on a climb up 1,269-foot tall Mount Toby in western Massachusetts, where I set up my little pup tent, spread out my yoga mat in front of it, sat down, and embarked on a day of meditation in search of the clear blue light. After a few hours, the air started getting thick with humidity. Dark clouds swirled overhead, blackening the sky, and then crack! A huge thunderbolt struck close by me with a deafening roar on top of the mountain. This continued until well past sunset, hour after hour after hour, with lightning crashing all around me, and all I could see were brilliant, blinding flashes of electric blue and white light, followed by prolonged spells of total darkness, as my eyes simply could not adjust after seeing the lightning bolts so close and so repeatedly. I'm going to pause here for a second to give you an image of a bolt of lightning. I realized that in my yearning to see the divine, I had placed myself totally at God's mercy, and there was no running away from this experience. Afraid at first, I came to accept my fate and just marveled at what was going on all around and all before me. Eventually, the storm stopped, and totally drenched, I crawled back into my tent and went to sleep. Upon wakening, the grass outside glistened with the morning dew, and I found myself surrounded by a patch of wild blueberries, and I had such a breakfast. Afterwards, I climbed down off the mountain, hitched a ride into Boston, and made it to the Red Wing bookstore, where I asked if there were any books on sacred light and energy, such as what I had experienced. The owner suggested I start reading about acupuncture, Willem Reich, and his search on the orgone. I came to learn that the Chinese based their entire system of healing excuse me, on building up and promoting the flow of energy within the body with this primordial, ubiquitous energy called qi, along pathways within the body called channels or meridian. Everything the Chinese said was made of qi in one state of expansion or contraction of another. In time, I realized that the properties of God, omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence, all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-present, were like qi, and that modern physicists even thought the same of light, that light was everywhere, that all knowledge was encoded in electromagnetic impulses, and that light in its various waveforms, frequencies, and amplifications was the power which creates everything. So when we're talking about being in the flow, we're talking about being in the flow of a primordial, omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent energy, God or spirit, if you will, that flows within us all. When it's deficient or too abundant or stuck, then we get ill, then we get sick. When this energy is present in the right amount and circulating properly through our channels and organs, then we are healthy. This energy the Chinese call qi is known by the Japanese as ki, The Indians call it prana. The Native Americans called it the Great Spirit. And the French philosopher Henri Bergson called it the élan vital. And Wilhelm Reich called it orgone. In the human body, this energy manifests as blood, oxygen, and electrical ions such as potassium. And it can be seen in the human aura when viewed by psychics or with the aid of Kirlian photography. I'm going to stop for a moment to show you a Kirlian photography. You can see two Kirlian photographs here. One is of two hands side by side with the energy radiating from them. Another is of the whole human body. I used to have a Kirlian photographic instrument in my clinic, and it was amazing to see if there was a shortage of energy in one channel or one meridian pathway, you could see it reflected in the Kirlian photograph. Or if the energy was stuck, you'd see a discoloration in the meridian. And it was also interesting, we could put two people's hands together, and if they were compatible, you'd see the energies merge in the Kirlian photograph. The auras would come together. And if they weren't compatible, they'd repel each other. It was pretty dramatic. Anyways, this life energy, this vital life energy has been known for thousands of years by many cultures, by most cultures. But scientists in the 20th century dismissed it altogether as being a myth, a falsehood, untrue, and forces in America worked successfully to ban any alternative practice of medicine that made reference to life energy. And any mention that it worked therapeutically was definitely taboo. So all these practices of medicine, acupuncture, homeopathy, that have been used in the 18th and 19th and 20th centuries, they all get banned and you can practice them. In fact, chiropractic went through a long struggle because they didn't understand that there's life energy radiating from the spine that affects the organs. And it took a long time for chiropractors to get legalized as well. Now, 20th century scientists, astrophysicists, and astronomers also spread their own myth that there was no omnipresent energy in the world, and that indeed outer space itself was one vast, empty vacuum, a great void. In fact, in the 20th century, we had philosophies emerged, such as communism and scientific materialism, that stated there was no God, there was no divine spirit, there was no universal energy, there was just matter. And that's all there was. And there was energy associated with matter, but it was pretty limited, pretty confined, and there was no real need for a spiritual consciousness. And in that philosophical framework, we had two world wars that killed millions and millions of people. We had genocides, we had Holocaust. It wasn't a healthy time for the human species. And in fact, today we still have this going on. There are some cultures that don't allow for any spiritual practice and are really suppressing their people. However, 20th century scientists have been proven wrong. Wilhelm Reich in the 1940s, 50s, did a profound study on the orgone and came to prove repeatedly that there is a primordial, omnipresent energy and that it followed certain natural laws and it could be used for healing, and indeed was used for healing. I'm going to pause for a moment to show you a photo of orgone in action, swirling spirally as a galaxy. I mean, that's a pretty amazing image of energy swirling, energy on a cosmic scale swirling. That energy is orgone, prana, chi, ki, the Great Spirit. And Reich discovered laws about how this energy works. One, most important, is that it fills all space. It is everywhere. Two, that it's mass-free, it's cosmic, and it's primordial. Three, it penetrates all matter at different rates of speed. Four, it spontaneously pulsates, expanding and contracting, spinning spirally. Now, one thing about life is defined by expansion and contraction, expansion and contraction, expansion and contraction. All life pulsates. All life energy pulsates. And if there's no pulsation, you have death. Rocks don't pulsate. They're pretty much dead. If something's pulsating, it's alive. The pulse of life, we call it. Another quality of the orgone is you can observe it and measure it directly. And Reich did so many times. Another quality Oh, let me stop for a second. I'm going to pause to show you a photograph of the astronaut Andy Bean on the moon, and you can see the orgone envelope around him. Again, the orgone, or the chi, prana, the great spirit, it increases tissue growth and repair, and it promotes wound healing. It increases energy in the body, increases aliveness, activity, and immunity. Two other qualities of the orgone are that it's attracted to and contained and absorbed in organic matter, but attracted to then repelled by inorganic matter. And think for a moment about the mystery of the Great Pyramid of Giza at Cheops. The outside shell of that pyramid is limestone, and limestone is an organic rock. It's a sedimentary rock. So it absorbs orgone or chi or prana. It stores it in that rock, but then the very innermost chambers of the Great Pyramid are made of granite. And granite is an inorganic rock. So it absorbs the orgone or the chi or the prana from the outer layers of limestone, puts it into the granite, and then dispels it, reflects it inward. So we have a lot of accumulation of energy right in the very center of the Great Pyramid. We can talk for months about the mysteries of the Great Pyramid, but that's beyond our ken right now. And another quality of the orgone is that radiation blocks the flow of orgone, blocks the flow of chi, blocks the flow of prana, blocks the flow of the Great Spirit. Unfortunately for Wilhelm Reich, he started publicizing his findings about the orgone and how radiation was not healthy for human beings. And he was publicizing this in the 1950s when the United States, China, the USSR, England, and France were exploding so many nuclear bombs above ground and released 50,000 tons of radioactive material into the atmosphere. It wasn't until 1963 when President Kennedy, God bless his soul, passed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty around the world, and we stopped exploding nuclear bombs into the atmosphere. But when we were exploding nuclear bombs into the atmosphere, scientists did not have an idea of how nuclear energy affected health and how nuclear radiation affected health adversely. We just kept doing it. And the US military thought it was very important for us to develop this nuclear technology and these nuclear bombs. And Wilhelm Reich became persona non grata in the scientific world because he was speaking very loudly against nuclear energy and very loudly against nuclear bombs. And as a result, he was imprisoned. All of his books, virtually every one of his books was burned in a massive book burning by the FDA. The FDA did not like the fact that he was promoting healing using this technology that was obviously fraudulent, because when they looked into the orgone box, they found nothing. So obviously there was nothing there. So obviously there can be no reason for him to be promoting this technology. And he was put in jail. He died in jail in 1957, and almost all of his books were burned. Well, it wasn't until 1993 that Congresswoman Pat Schroeder and Senator Barbara Mikulski from Maryland got inkling that women who were getting mammograms were getting sick from the mammograms. From 1975 to 1993, all the mammograms in the country delivered on average 10 units of radiation per exam. 10 units of radiation is a lot of radiation. In fact, the US submarine force, sailors working in the submarines, wear badges, and the badges say how much radiation they've accumulated during the course of their submarine service. And if in the course of a couple of tours of duty, a few tours of duty, they'd accumulated 250 units of radiation, they were put out to pasture. They weren't allowed to serve anymore because the military knew that these men were about to get cancer, because 250 units of radiation will definitely give you cancer. You're in really bad shape. One reason why is the radiation strikes your genes, the human gene, and can knock off the part of the gene that programs cell death. That's called apoptosis. So the apoptosis part of the human gene tells the cells when to stop replicating. Usually the cells stop replicating after 25 permutations or so. So the cells replicate 25 times, and then they stop, and then new cells come in and start creating life. But if a cell goes on and replicates without stopping, that is cancer. That's a cancerous mutation. Uncontrolled cell growth is cancer. So the radiation was causing cancer, and Barbara Mikulski and Congresswoman Schroeder became very concerned about this. And in 1993, they passed the Mammogram Quality Safety Assurance Act, which required that all mammogram units in the United States be inspected once a year, and the amount of radiation coming from them have to be very, very limited. It went from 10 units of radiation to 0.163 units of radiation per exam. So in 10 mammograms, you're only getting 1.63 units of radiation, whereas prior to that, you were getting, 163 units of radiation. So, that's a huge difference. It wasn't healthy to get that much radiation, and women who've been given mammograms from 1975 to 1995 developed a lot of breast cancer as a result of the very medical technology that was designed to cure them or prevent the cancer. Now, in 1995, the law went fully into effect, and ever since then, mammograms have been very safe, and I recommend mammograms for women. But prior to 1995, it was a bad deal. Unfortunately, Dr. William Reich paid the price for blowing the whistle on this. Now, in America, we have a lot of CAT scans and x-rays given every year. The person who most researched the health effects of x-rays and CAT scans on human health was Dr. John Goffman. Dr. Goffman in the 1940s was a physicist, a nuclear physicist, part of the Manhattan Project. He was head of Berkeley Livermore Laboratories in California, and he was given the responsibility to figure out how to turn uranium-234 into uranium-235 so it can become part of a nuclear bomb. He was also responsible for figuring out how to make plutonium in sizable amounts. He did this research. He got a patent for transforming uranium-235 into transforming uranium-234 into uranium-235, and how to create sizable amounts of plutonium. And his work led to the development of the first atomic bombs that were used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Well, after the war, Dr. Goffman wasn't too happy about all the people who died, and he decided to dedicate his life to medicine. He went back to medical school and became a cardiologist, and won an award for being one of the top cardiologists of the 20th century, because he was the one who discovered how cholesterol works against human health and against heart health. In 1960, nuclear scientists wanted to start building nuclear power plants. They went to the US Congress to get funding to build 1,000 nuclear power plants. And the Congress asked the simple question, well, does this in any way affect human health, this radiation? And the scientists said, well, we don't know. Nobody's ever tested this before, other than in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So the Congress said, well, let's take a pause here. Let's call on a nuclear scientist to do some experiments, do some research, and tell us what the health effects of nuclear radiation are. And Dr. John Goffman was picked to do this research because he was one of the great experts in nuclear physics. He studied for 7 years the effect of radiation on human health, delivered his report to Congress 7 years later, and the head of the Congressional Subcommittee on Nuclear Energy said to Dr. Goffman, "You will never get another research grant from this government ever again. We appreciate your information, but this really harms our nuclear program, and you've done a disservice to the country by bringing this information to our attention." Well, what he really did was made the country aware that nuclear energy and radiation is bad for human health. And as a result, the 1,000 nuclear power plants weren't funded in the United States. I think we have 70 or 80 in the United States right now. But people started to become aware of the effect of medical imaging in terms of the radiation it produced. And Dr. Goffman wrote a number of books on how much X-rays create cancer, how much CAT scans create cancer. And he really urged that particularly CAT scans be used much less frequently. And they're used way too much, and they cause a lot of cancer and heart disease. Now, Dr. Goffman did an epidemiological study on different groups in the United States who had been exposed to radiation and who hadn't been. He found that Native American uranium miners in the Four Corners region, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, had high incidence of cancer because they'd been mining uranium without any protection. And the sheep herders in the area who took their sheep to pools that had been filled with water that had previously been uranium digs, those pools of water were rich in uranium, and the sheep got sick, and the farmers got sick, and their children got sick with cancer because of the exposure to uranium. Conversely, most of the Native Americans in the United States have the lowest rate of cancer and the lowest rate of heart disease in the United States, but they have the highest rate of 13 other diseases that are easily treated by modern medicine. Now, the reason they had lower levels of heart disease and cancer, because they almost never got medical care. Native Americans in this country are so ill-served by our healthcare service. They rarely get proper healthcare. They don't get basic antibiotics. They don't get basic treatment for most diseases to which they succumb, especially diabetes. But they don't get CAT scans. They don't get x-rays. And as a result, they get much, much less cancer and much less heart disease than the rest of the American population. So think about that the next time you're scheduled for an x-ray or a CAT scan. One caveat though, dental x-rays emit very little radiation and they go into a part of the body that almost never develops cancer. So the teeth very rarely develop cancer. So dental x-rays are okay, but the other x-rays you have to be more mindful about. Now, getting back to the orgone, when it's abundant, people are healthy. When it's not abundant, people get sick. Christ had a number of healing miracles, and healing miracles are defined by Pope Benedict of the Catholic Church in the following way. And now I'm going to read from a book called The Pattern of Health by Aubrey Westlake. Now, the official definition of miracles as defined by the Catholic Church, Pope Benedict XIV in 1957 was this: the disease must be serious and impossible, or at least very difficult to cure. The disease must not have reached a state in which it was liable to disappear shortly of its own accord. No medical treatment must have been applied, or if it were, it must certainly have been ineffectual. The cure must be sudden, instantaneous. The cure must be complete. It must not be preceded by any crisis due to natural causes at the expected times. Otherwise, the cure, far from being miraculous, must be considered either wholly or partially as natural. And finally, there must be no relapse into the same disease after the cure. Now, in our history, who do we recognize as being miraculous for his healing powers? It was Jesus Christ. Today I'm speaking on Easter Sunday, pre-recording this for next Saturday's talk. Christ was a miraculous healer, and he healed in many ways. Here are 10 different ways in which he healed. He healed by touch only, by touch with physical accessories, saliva, clay, and washing, touch and the word of command, by casting out of unclean spirits, by someone touching his garment, touching by direction, touching at a distance. He raised the dead, and he gave his healing power to others. And Christ made a point of saying to others when he was asked about his miraculous power to heal, he says, you can do this too. What I can do, you can do, and beyond what I can do. So don't think that I'm the only one who can do this. You have this power within you too. You can be a healer as well. Now, from Reich's viewpoint, and from my personal viewpoint, Christ was full of this orgone energy, this life energy. It concentrated within him because his consciousness was at a higher plane, and at higher planes, you can really pull in the energy. There's a series of books by Max Freedom Long called the Hawaiian healing method called Huna. And Huna thought that there was a physical body, but this physical body could draw into it this divine energy and empower you to create miracles. And I believe that's what Christ did. I'm going to pause to show you a photograph of a book. The book is Modern Miraculous Cures, a documented account of miracles and medicine in the 20th century, written by Francois Lorette. It's about the healing miracles at Lourdes. And this book documents in exquisite detail, with blood tests and medical histories before and after, of people going to Lourdes very ill, blind, deaf, immobile, paralyzed, with all sorts of serious ailments that have been completely cataloged and chronicled. They went to Lourdes, and within 2 or 3 days, they came out completely healed. These were medical miracles, and they were very, very well documented, and you can find them in Modern Miraculous Cures, a documented account of miracles and medicine in the 20th century. And these miracles all fit Pope Benedict's definition of miracles. They were true miracles. They're very well documented. I think they were I think they happened because Lourdes is a place on earth where there's a great concentration of this orgone, chi, prana, ki, great spirit energy in the water. So people were exposed to the waters at Lourdes, and that infused them with this energy, plus the power of their belief. Now, Ernest Holmes talks a lot about the power of prayer and how prayer can heal. I really tip my hat to Ernest Holmes. He's a great, great thinker, great spiritual master, great spiritual teacher. But he didn't really know about the placebo effect. He just thought that was the power of prayer. In the late 20th century, we've become much more aware of the placebo effect. I studied with Dr. Ted Kapchuk, who's now the professor at Harvard University on the healing power of the placebo, or harnessing the placebo effect. That's his mission at Harvard, to do research on placebo. Ted was one of the first Americans to study acupuncture in China. From 1972 to 1975, he was in China. Then he came back to Boston. He was one of my teachers in Boston. He was a great guy. And all the time he would be asked, and he became quite famous. He was even on the Johnny Carson show talking about acupuncture, because he wrote a book called The Web That Has No Weaver. He's talking about this whole universe of energy that's just infused with energy, just weaving back and forth and creating structures and creating health, creating human beings, creating natural life. He was asked repeatedly, isn't acupuncture just the placebo effect? Isn't this just mind over matter? And Ted was struck by this question. He knew that the Chinese were very adept at healing. They used all sorts of Chinese herbs for over 5,000 years. They used acupuncture. They had very good results, but he wanted to answer the question, was acupuncture just a result of placebo? And he found that acupuncture worked very well on animals who really weren't that subject to the placebo effect. They weren't really subject to the powers of suggestion, he thought, because they didn't know what you were saying to them. You just stuck the needles in and they got well. So he did further research on placebo. He became so good at it that Harvard hired him. And they did a great number of experiments, one of which they gave people sugar pills, which were the placebo, and they gave them medicines. And they found that between 25 and 30% of the time, the sugar pills would have an effect just as the medicine had. So people would get cured 30% of the time from their ailment just by taking the sugar pills. And you could boost this effect by letting the patient think that they were getting, for sure, the medicine. So what they would do is they would take a bottle of pills, they put the name of the medicine on the bottle of pills. So for example, say you were suffering from anxiety and you knew that Xanax was good for anxiety. So they put on the bottle of placebo pills, Xanax, and they'd have another bottle of placebo pills that was just untitled, didn't have a name on it. So people would take the untitled bottle and they got better maybe 30% of the time. They take the bottle that had Xanax on it, which was not Xanax, it was just a sugar pill, and they get better 35, 40% of the time. Ted found out, along with all these scientists at Harvard, that the placebo effect is really a function of the human mind. The human mind has within its genetic structure, and they identified the part of the human gene that empowers this placebo effect to create healing. So there's a part of our human mind that instructs the genes to release this healing power within the body in response to prayer, meditation, positive affirmation for healing. So the human body is really designed for healing. People think that we're not capable of healing ourselves. All healing is self-healing. Everything I do as an acupuncturist with herbs, everything a medical doctor does with medicines, it's all to stimulate the body to heal itself. The human body is designed for healing. There's so many amusing things about the placebo. One amusing thing is that the medical companies, the pharmaceutical companies, are required by the FDA to prove that their drugs are greater in ability to heal than just placebos. So there's a certain percentage that they have to be better than placebos for them to get approved. Unfortunately for the pharmaceutical industry, in the last 20 years, the placebo effect in America has been growing from 25 to 30 to 35%, and it's getting pretty close to the 45% or so that drugs have efficacy with. So the placebo effect is making it tougher for the pharmaceutical industry to prove that their drugs actually work. In fact, with this COVID crisis, the big medical companies, the companies that made the vaccines, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Moderna, they had to do double-blind studies giving people placebo vaccinations, just injecting sterile water into their arm or injecting vaccines. They did this on thousands of people over the last year, and they found that when people got injected with the vaccines, their antibodies against COVID went up significantly, dramatically, a lot, enough to help people never get COVID-19. But the scientists doing this research also found out that when people were injected with sterile water, thinking it was the COVID vaccine, they generated antibodies specifically for the COVID-19 vaccine. So 25% of the people who just got sterile water developed immunity against COVID because of the placebo effect. I think that's remarkable. I think we should give ourselves a lot more credit for being able to heal ourselves. Now, speaking of healing ourselves, I've got a couple of stories to tell. In the 1970s, it became a third-degree felony to practice acupuncture in the United States. Sadly, July 1972 became a third-degree felony in all 50 states. So I moved to Canada, Saskatchewan, Canada. I studied in British Columbia and in Saskatchewan, traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture. And I had a farmhouse there, and the winters were cold in Saskatchewan, so I was putting a new metal chimney into my farmhouse. I had a friend down below pushing the chimney up, and I was up top on the roof pulling the chimney up so I could clamp it in place. And my friend who was pushing the chimney from below let go, and I was holding onto the chimney. It pulled down, and it ripped the muscles in my left shoulder. Unfortunately, it was 20 below zero that day that I was doing this work. So a cold wind blew into my shoulder right where I'd been injured, and it stuck in there. And the Chinese call this cold wind, evil wind, and it can cause different diseases, musculoskeletal diseases. And for a year after that, I was really in pain. I was just really suffering. But then they changed the law in Massachusetts, so I was able to practice and study under a Chinese doctor who was working under the supervision of a U.S. medical doctor in Boston. I went back to Boston to study with Dr. John Ho Fen Shen. I told him what was going on with my shoulder. He says, gua sha, you need gua sha. He had a spoon, a little porcelain spoon. By the way, these spoons you can get in any Chinese restaurant or a Chinese herbal supply shop. They cost about 50 cents. If you buy one for yourself, make sure it's smooth on the edges. Fill the edge to make sure it's not sharp at all. He took the spoon, he started rubbing my neck and my shoulder with it repeatedly. And after a few seconds, it turned red, and then I had these big red blotches show up on my neck and my shoulder. But within 10 minutes, the pain that I'd been experiencing for over a year, pain that was really crippling. And it brought me to tears often. I was in so much pain. I didn't know what to do about it. It was just agony. In 10 minutes, that pain went away. It was my own medical healing miracle. So I learned how to do it. I wrote a course about it. And you can see that course for free. You can read the course for free at my website, www.hkacup.com. And we're going to insert a little photograph of instructions on how to get to my website. You can click on my website, click on acupuncture courses, go down to Gua Sha, it's spelled G-W-A Sha or G-U-A Sha. Click on the course and you can read it for free. You only have to pay if you want to take the examination to get credit for continuing education courses, which you don't want to do. So you can read all about how to do it. And now I'm going to insert a little video. It's a time-lapse photography video of somebody doing gua sha, so you see what the process looks like. So over the past, since 1975, I've done gua sha, literally thousands of people, many of whom have had debilitating headaches, horrible migraines. I have one of the top neurologists in Sarasota referring me headache patients every week because he's got patients that the medications don't even treat, and he is the specialist for treating migraines with medications. Usually he's successful, but when he can't find success with the medications, he refers the patients to me, and they almost all get well. And all I do, besides acupuncture, is little gua sha with a spoon. It's pretty miraculous. And almost every Chinese grandmother knows how to do it. So it's something that all of you can do with just a little instruction, watching a video, reading my course. It's simple to do, and you'll be a hero to somebody in your family at some point in your life. Now, there are herbs that we use in Chinese medicine that are a basic part of every Chinese household. One of them is Yunnan Baiyao. Give me a moment here. This is the box of Yunnan Baiyao. I first heard about this from my friends who came back from Vietnam. In Vietnam, we had medevac helicopters, we had mobile field hospitals, our soldiers got wounded, they got really good care right away. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese troops didn't have any of that stuff. They just carried around packets of Yunnan Baiyao, and they sprinkled it on their wounds, and they took it internally to heal themselves. It's an herbal compound that's really rich in the orgone, really rich in this life force, and really helps with healing. And the Chinese discovered this because they would track tigers that had been wounded in the wild. And when they killed the tigers, they cut open their bellies to see what herbs they ate to heal themselves. And from that process of investigation, they came up with an herbal formula called Yunnan Baiyao, which they turn into a powder and put it into capsules, and they give it to people when they're suffering from internal bleeding or suffering from some sort of wound that gets infected. And it became such a popular remedy that the Chinese military declared it a state military secret of China, so that nobody knows what the exact formula is anymore. The Chinese government makes it and controls it. U.S. troops during the Vietnam War would go to Hong Kong for rest and recuperation. And in Hong Kong, they would seek out Yunnan Baiyao in the pharmacies and get it and bring it back to Vietnam and take it with them themselves when they were out in the field in Vietnam. You can get it now on Amazon. They still don't list the ingredients, which I don't know how the FDA allows them to sell it, but they don't list the ingredients, but they do recommend it. It's a very good herb. Another herbal compound that I like a lot is Chin Wong Hung. I want to stop for a second and talk about Yunnan Baiyao one more time. I had a patient who was an award-winning landscape architect. In fact, he got an award from Barbara Bush when she was First Lady for landscape architecture work he'd done in Washington, D.C. And he went to Europe to receive some other award, but he was HIV positive back in the day before we had the cocktail of drugs that could really help HIV patients. He went to Europe, and on the plane ride down, when the plane was landing, a blood vessel burst in his nose. His blood vessels were very fragile, and he started bleeding, and he was about to bleed to death because he only had a platelet count of 4. Normally, platelet counts are in the hundreds for most people. The platelets are what stick together and prevent you from bleeding to death. Well, he had this nosebleed. He only had 4 platelets in his system. He was bleeding to death. He got off the plane when it landed, went right to the baggage counter, opened up his bag, because in the bag, I had given him an emergency supply of Yunnan Baiyao. He snorted some of it, and he took some by mouth, and in seconds, the bleeding stopped, and it saved his life. So again, I recommend Yunnan Baiyao for people. I also recommend Xin Wang Heng, and I'll stop to show you a photograph of Xin Wang Heng. Xin Wang Heng is a miraculous salve that the Chinese use in all their hospitals and in every home when somebody's been burnt. It works very well against all sorts of burns, no matter how severe. I burnt myself pretty severely at times, put it on my hands, and in a matter of days, the wound heals up with no infection. It stops the pain almost immediately and dramatically promotes healing. So I recommend everybody have some Xin Wang Heng in their medicine cabinet in case you get burned, especially you may want to keep it in your kitchen because that's where people usually get burned in America. So keep some Xin Wang Heng on hand. You can get it from Amazon for, I don't know, $10 or $15. It's an easy to get herb. Very, very, very helpful. Another herb I recommend is Andrographis. You can get it from Amazon. You can get it from any health food store. And the Chinese have a version of Andrographis called Chuan Xin Lian. Here's a picture of it. Here's a bottle of it. I'm going to stop to give a little picture of it. Chuan Xin Lian Wan is the Chinese herbal formula. Contains mostly Andrographis, which is really superb for dealing with viral infections, especially viral infections of the throat and upper respiratory system. I use it all the time. It's my go-to remedy for treating upper respiratory infections or treating viral infections. In fact, the Chinese use it a lot for treating COVID-19. In America, we've had about 500,000 deaths from COVID in the past year. In China, as of July, they had only about 4,800 recorded deaths from COVID, even though their population is 1.3 billion. I don't trust the Chinese statistics. I think they try to make themselves look good by minimizing the amount of deaths that they're reporting. But I do trust the statistics from Taiwan. And last year, the Taiwanese only had 27 deaths from COVID. And one of the reasons they had so few deaths from COVID, as one of the reasons the Chinese had so few deaths from COVID, is that they used traditional Chinese medicine. 90% of all people afflicted with COVID in China and Taiwan took traditional Chinese medicinal formula, herbs for the treatment of the symptoms of COVID. One of the main herbs they took was Chuan Xin Lian. Another was mulberry leaf. Mulberry leaf is probably the best herb available for treating upper respiratory problems, lung problems. It's very, very good for lung problems. In fact, in my old home, I had two mulberry trees, and I'd snip the leaves off the trees, bring them to the office, and give them to patients whenever they had any lung problems. I moved. I don't have a tree in my backyard now, but my sister has a tree, and I always use the leaves from her tree. And you take the whole leaf, you cut it up into pieces, and put it into a teapot, and boil up the tea, and then pour it into a cup, this tea of mulberry, and add a little honey and drink it. It's very, very, very good for lungs. Now, if you send me an email, I'll send you the entire course I've written about how to treat COVID with Western pharmaceuticals and adding on Chinese herbs. And the Chinese did a big book about what they do exactly for treating COVID. A friend of mine, Dr. Dan Bensky from Sydney, Australia, translated that book into English. I'm going to send that book to you if you want. in English, not in Chinese. Now, I've got another book to show you. I'll stop for a second to show you this other book. This is The Practice of Dream Healing. The Practice of Dream Healing by Dr. Tick, Edward Tick, PhD. We recognize that Hippocrates was the founder of modern Western medicine. Well, Hippocrates was a practitioner on the island of Kos of dream healing. And this was passed down from the great Greek healer Asclepius, who thought that most healing took place at night when you were sleeping. And he is right, he was right, because healing takes place when you're sleeping. When you're awake, you're in a state of catabolism, your tissues are breaking down. When you're asleep, you're in a state of anabolism, your tissues are building up. You've heard of anabolic steroids that build up the body? Well, when you're sleeping, your body is in an anabolic state, it's building up, repairing, and healing. You need to sleep well to heal your body. One of the things you don't want to do is sleep with electromagnetic fields around your body while you're trying to sleep. Your body has a natural energy flow, flowing. But when it encounters this electromagnetic energy while you're sleeping, it stops the flow and gets in the way of your getting a good night's rest, gets in the way of your healing yourself. So I recommend everybody take all electrical appliances away from their bed. Have a zone about 4 feet around your bed where there are no electrical appliances. That means no telephones, no cell phones that are on, no lights that are on, no electrical blankets, nothing electrical around your bed for about 4 feet. You'll sleep much better. Also, planet Earth has an electromagnetic field that goes from North Pole to South Pole. And the energy is flowing north to south, north to south, north to south, like that. And if you sleep with your head to the north, you're aligned with this natural energetic flow of the planet, and you're much more likely to have a good night's sleep and to repair yourself when you're sleeping. So I recommend that you sleep with your head to the north, be free of electromagnetic influences, and also read Dr. Tick's book on dream healing. What Asclepius and Hippocrates did, they had people come into a temple, and in the temple there was a hole in the ground about 4 feet deep, almost like a grave. It was about 4 feet deep. People would take herbs that would help them sleep. They go lie down in this pit and sleep for 2 or 3 days. And while they were sleeping, they would dream about what it was that was making them sick, what psychological state, what psychic imbalance, what spiritual imbalance was at the root of their sickness. And they would heal themselves in their sleep state. And after 2 or 3 days, they'd wake up, their disease was gone. So they heal themselves on a very fundamental level. And when you're sleeping, your brain waves are at the theta and delta levels, you're much more capable of affecting a cure for your own ailment. So I really recommend dream healing. Recommend you read the book, and recommend you get a good night's sleep every night. Now, one final thing I want to talk about is Alzheimer's. People are suffering from Alzheimer's. They also suffer from stroke. They also suffer from traumatic brain injury. Now, human beings are designed so that we have a lymphatic system in the dura mater of our skull. So in the skull, there are these fine little tubules where lymph drains toxins away from the brain. So when you're sleeping at night, you're laying horizontal, and your cerebral spinal fluid, this fluid within the spine, pumps up the spine and goes in the brain, and is like a automatic dishwasher for the brain. It's pulsing all night long, and taking any waste proteins like tau proteins or beta amyloid plaques that cause Alzheimer's. They take it into the lymph system and drain it out into the lymph system and get rid of it from your brain. So your brain gets washed every night. You get brainwashed. Unlike watching television or stupid movies, you're getting a healthy brainwashing. So you don't have these plaques building up in your brain causing Alzheimer's. But what happens sometimes is that people develop too much beta amyloid plaque or tau proteins in their brain, and your lymphatic system gets clogged, and then you develop Alzheimer's. I have a friend, Dr. Margaret Nazer, who's head of stroke rehab at Boston University Veterans Center, and she's a brilliant PhD scientist. She and some of her colleagues have developed a whole system using light to heal the brain, to get the lymph system of the brain working better, to actually repair the brain cells themselves, to help when people have strokes, can't move, have aphasia, can't speak, have Alzheimer's, have traumatic injury from playing football, for example. She treats a lot of NFL football players. She does this using light. Now, one of the things she does, also, the light is also very, very effective against treating COVID. Now, Israeli scientists recently came up with a new system where they spray nitric oxide into the nose, a little spray bottle, and the nitric oxide kills 99.99% of all viruses, not just COVID viruses, but all viruses. So you spray this nitric oxide in your nose and it kills the COVID and you're COVID-free. Do it once a day and you're in good shape. Well, Dr. Nazer discovered that if you put light, LED light into your nose at 820 nanometers pulsing, it goes directly into your brain, but it also stimulates all the tissues around your nose to produce nitric oxide. So there's a certain frequency of light that produces nitric oxide. So getting back to Christ for a moment, when Christ put his hands out to heal, he could direct light at people at different frequencies, and that light coming from them will provoke healing responses within their body. So when people have COVID and they're exposed to nitric oxide, the COVID goes away. It kills the COVID. And I'm going to try to show you in the camera. I think this will work. This is the device that Dr. Nazer developed along with others. It's called a neurogamma device. And you clip it into your nose. First, I'm going to show into the camera. You see the light flashing? I think you'll see that. The way this works, you stick it in your nose, and it sends light directly into your brain, but also into all the tissues around your nose, and you develop a large amount of nitric oxide that serves to kill COVID. And the light going to your brain also helps to strengthen your brain cells to repair yourself if you had a stroke or something like that, or Alzheimer's. And there's a helmet you wear as well. This helmet has 4 LED lights on it. I'll try to flash one of them in front of the camera. You see the light flashing? Well, that's at a certain frequency. You put it on your skull. It's a little hard to do to myself. Put part of it in the front of the brain, part midway between the midpoint of the brain and the occiput, and a couple of lights in the back. And it pulses the brain and helps heal the brain tissue. It's very effective for stroke, very effective for Alzheimer's, very effective for traumatic brain injury. And it's also surprisingly effective against opioid addiction and different drug addictions. I had an alcoholic come in to see me, 22-year-old football player who had a traumatic brain injury. He was a star football player from Notre Dame University. Notre Dame is a big football school. Poor 21-year-old kid, he had the traumatic brain injury, couldn't play football anymore, had bad headaches, started drinking and couldn't stop drinking. He came to see me. I did it to him once. And his mother's overjoyed. He's been a month now without drinking, which is pretty amazing. I also use it with opioid addicts, and there's a lot of research showing that it's good for opioid addiction. So light can heal. You know, we don't give enough credit to the miraculous power of the mind, the miraculous power of this universal energy that's everywhere, the miraculous power of belief. So on that note, I'd like to wish you all namaste. You know, the divine energy in me recognizes and honors the divine energy in you. If you ever want to go to my website, you can see all my courses for free. And I wish you all the very best. Good night.